This is Joanne Nelson, and the presentation is Death in the Coronavirus Era. As we have learned from this class, thanatology is the science of the study of death, its rituals, and its myths. That definition is from our instructor, Dr. F. Keith Slaughter. Additionally, thanatopsis is the memorial or written reflection on death. This presentation talks about Black thanatology. We have seen lately a slew of murders and unnatural death. Dr. Slaughter has said that to die is natural, but to be killed is unnatural. We all know that death is inevitable, but how we choose to die or how we die is something else in its entirety. In looking at our African roots, we have seen that the mourning and the rituals and the funerals in Africa have an effect or an impact on death and how we treat death in America. In Africa, there is a term called good death versus bad death. A good death is death that occurs and implicates regeneration or a seed or reincarnation. And a bad death is just the opposite. It's one that occurs in the shed of blood or a car accident or suicide or something of that nature. The African culture had death associated with it by fashioning a balance between the dead and the needs of the living. The dead's interest was in becoming an ancestor, and the living wanted to help encourage or make this happen, because if the person did not get buried properly, then that increased the chances that this person would not become an ancestor, but would become a witch or engage in witchcraft and bring evil to the living. From the living's perspective, if the person were an ancestor, that person would offer protection to the living. Of course, colonialism changed how Africans handle rituals and mourning, because the white Christian missionaries wanted to impose their traditions on African culture. As we progress through the years, we see how racism has so systematically impacted our lives. From being brought over in slavery and chains some 400 years ago to having gone through the freedom of the slaves and having dealt with Reconstruction and being hopeful in Reconstruction, where we were given 40 acres, but the devastation that did not last, and that the land often reverted to the former slave owners, to dealing with Jim Crow laws and the voting rights suppression, up until the present time, Black people have been impacted by institutionalized systemic racism. Stokely Carmichael has, um, along with Charles Hamilton, have coined that phrase. And I want to tell you that in light of systemic racism, we encounter a whole lot of problems that we may not recognize as racism, but they are racist. That's redlining and the difficulty in obtaining jobs and resources. So now we're dealing with the coronavirus, and we first saw an impact, um, and a thrust of resources toward the coronavirus. But once the numbers started coming out and the country saw that the virus impacted Black people and brown people more than it did other people, then we saw the rallies and the protests to reopen the country. Finally, this type of systemic racism requires a plan, and the plan must come from the pastors. Theologically, if I were ministering to my congregation, I would remind them that God is on the side of the oppressed. James Cone said that. And not only did James Cone say it, but it's attributed to Jesus in Luke 4:18. I came to set the captives free and to give sight to the blind. We are captive today. Then I would remind the congregants that God can turn this thing around. God is on our side. Finally, I would provide some care for the psychological needs of my congregants. We deal with the mental health and the high risk of suicide in times like these because it's a very traumatic time. And then finally, I would talk more about my plans and my practical advice. My practical advice just involves some training and just talking to the people. With regards to corona, wear a mask. Stay 6 feet away or be 6 feet under. That's attributed to my pastor, Jeffrey A. Stallworth. And then the plans for the future call for education and training. We have to invest in our education system. I want us to demilitarize the police forces. Why do we need tanks to police? Then I want to educate our teachers. Keep the good teachers. Find more good teachers. Go to City Hall. Demand changes on the books about the policies that impact Black people and keep Black people down. And then also, finally, be cognizant that we are living in a technological world. And we have to have a church without walls. Thank you.